Hi everybody, welcome to All Games New and Old. I'm David Rodriguez, and today I'm going to be reviewing Soldiers and Postmen's Uniforms. This game was published in 2021 by Dan Verssen Games, and it's designed by David Thompson. Now this is a solo game that plays, according to the box, between 60 and 75 minutes. That might be true for most people. Just for me, I don't know, a lot of analysis paralysis on this one. But either way, that's what the box says. So usually at this point, I have a special guest that will tell you about the theme of the game, but as we know, a lot of my special guests are kind of screwballs, and to be honest, there are certain topics and certain themes for games that I don't necessarily want someone making light of or being kind of goofy with it. And World War II is definitely one of them. It has, I don't want to go too much into it. It obviously has a lot of factors that still affect us even today. My father personally fought in World War II, so I don't want to make this a real goofy thing. If I have bloopers, I'll still include them. But I didn't want to have some kind of guest come in here who is going to be sillier than I think the topic deserves. So this is based on an actual event. So on the second day of World War II, the German forces came into Poland and were trying to seize certain installations, one of them being the Polish Post Office number 1. And so the people at the post office were told to hold out and defend as long as possible. Now, this attack went all day long, starting in the morning, going to the nighttime. At the very end of the day, they eventually, the Germans came with a fire truck that blasted gasoline into the building. They then threw in a grenade, setting the whole place ablaze, presumably killing everyone inside. So, pretty dark theme, obviously, but a historical one. And, you know, I'm not much one for realistic war games, at least not ones that take place in a time like since the age of gunpowder. It's just not my thing. I'm not that inspired by them, even though I appreciate those battles for what they were in a lot of cases. But World War II is an interesting one to me. I like to read about it or watch documentaries about it. I think it's a fascinating war, and part of that I think is because there is such a clear-cut bad guy in that war. You know, there's not a lot of shades of gray involved in that. And because of that, though, I still don't play a lot of war games set in World War II because oftentimes they're a two-player or more affair. Someone has to play the Germans, right? And to me, they're such, they're almost so, well, not almost, they're so over the top in how awful they were that I feel lucky playing them. I don't begrudge anyone else who has no problem playing a game like that. It's, you know, it's a topic that's, I don't know how many games cover World War II, but it's quite a lot. So, you know, no judgment here as far as that goes. But for me, I don't like it. And so I still don't even play a lot of games like that. But this being a solo game intrigued me. It being in a post office, which is where I work, not this post office, but, you know, one in the US. It really intrigued me, and I decided to go ahead and back it on Kickstarter. So that's what I've got. I got the Kickstarter version of the game. I don't know how different it is from any other version of the game that might be out there. It might be exactly the same. I don't honestly recall. I just bought it because I thought it looked like an interesting theme, and it was a type of game that I hadn't really played much of before. So I went with it. So all that being said, let me show you the basics of how the game is played. There are a lot of rules in this game, so I probably will not cover every single thing, but just to give you a basic gist. All right, folks, I've set up the game as instructed in the rulebook to start out with the morning phase. There's 3 phases in this game, morning, midday, and evening. So I'm just going to show you a bit of the morning stuff, and then the rest of the stuff you can catch on pretty easily, and there's a few minor changes in how you set things up. But other than that, they play pretty much the same. I just wanted to show you the setup over here first. I'm going to focus on one half of the board at a time because the board is just really, really long, and I'm afraid if I try to zoom out so I can catch everything, you're not going to be able to see much of anything. As it is, there's a lot of small detail on here. So what you're seeing, if you look at this part over here between my arms, this represents the inside of the post office, and you have the upper floors here, the ground floor, and the basement down here. So it tells you exactly how to set this up in the book. There's a few different color of Defender tokens. So there are the blue ones, and these represent people who are in the post office but who are not combatants. So they don't directly help you out although they can, I believe, move things from place to place. I've never used them for that, but they are important though, because if they should die, they cost you a lot of morale. So you want to make sure you keep them alive, and they're also great to help escape if you can. There are kind of the regular postal defenders, and these guys all have the white border. And what's kind of interesting is when you start the game, you actually take out 17 of them and you don't use them. And the reason why is because they wanted to have everyone represented that they knew was at the post office that they could, but they didn't fit them all into a single gameplay. So you're not going to use every single one every time you play. But I think it's really cool that they made sure that anyone they knew of was included. There are a few people they didn't have pictures of, but I believe all of these tokens are pictures of the actual people who were there, which I think is really pretty cool. So you have those people, you have the folks with the orange border that I believe are sort of like trained folks. They usually have a little bit stronger attack. And then there's folks with the gray border, and they're a little more specialized. They may have certain skills that can help you in your fight. Otherwise, the white border and orange border people, all the ones with the white borders are the same as each other. All the ones with the orange borders are the same, other than, of course, their name. But as far as abilities, they're all pretty interchangeable, so it doesn't really matter specifically where you put them. It also lets you put several things on the board. There are these ammo tokens, which help with doing suppressive fire if you are in a space with one of those, and a long-range weapon. You have grenades, which are good for killing several people at once, but there's only, I think, 4 in the whole game, for the whole game, so you don't want to use those unless you feel like you have to. There's been games where I haven't used them at all, and games where I've relied a little bit more heavily on them. You have these little tracks for each floor that have a little shield token there, and those help measure the defense of each floor, so that can get down over time, and if it gets down to the end and then you take more damage from certain weapons, it can really mess up your day, so you don't want that. There's a few weapons on the board. I'm not even going to try to read these because I am not a gun expert, but some of them are just regular range weapons, and the other ones are ranged, but they also help with suppressive fire, which can be useful to create sort of in terms of the game, it's almost like setting a booby trap for someone. Like, they're going to have to walk across this, but they're likely to get shot in the process as they do. So it is pretty cool to have if you can arrange that. Other than that, I think I'm missing some tokens. I moved some tokens. That is one thing with this board. It is very slick and glossy, and it is easy to accidentally move these tokens to spaces that they weren't supposed to be. They slide over it pretty easily, so you're going to want to be real careful as you move these guys around. I found just as I'm moving tokens, sometimes I accidentally move a different one, and I have to try to remember if I have these things in a different spot or not, because they end up kind of moving around almost seemingly on their own. That isn't quite the case, of course, but it seems like it. You also notice that these different rooms, in addition to being different floors, will have different colors. So there's red spaces, blue spaces, dark blue spaces, orange spaces, and then over here there's some of the spaces are half of them are white and half gray, and those help you determine line of sight for various things. Some things, if you're trying to shoot at somebody outside, if they're on, like for instance over here, you can probably see these red circles. It's like if you have somebody that has a ranged weapon up here in one of those red squares, that means they do have line of sight to those people in those red circles. So it kind of goes like that. There's a few other rules that utilize the specific colors that you're in, but more often than not, you're going to be looking at it in terms of having line of sight to your enemies. So that's basically that's set up. Let me move over to the other half, and I'll try to show you what's going on there, and I'll get started on how this game plays out. I know I always say I'm not going to go over every rule, and usually I end up going over just about every rule anyway. This time I really don't think I'm going to be able to. There's a lot of really little specific things where it's like, okay, if it's like this, then this happens, and those just take a while to learn, and if I try to hit every one of them, I think this particular explanation is going to go on forever. Okay, so this is the other half of the board. Down at the bottom is a pretty important track. This is your morale track. So you can see you have emboldened, shaken, panicked. Now, if it ever goes down past the 1, then you've immediately lost the game. Other than that, it's important because when you get to Act 3, or the evening part of the game, where your morale tracker is going to determine where the fire truck is put into the deck. It's still kind of randomized, and it's still going to be in the back end of the track, but like if you're still emboldened, it's the very last card. If you're shaken, I want to say it's within the last 5 or 6 cards, and if you're panicked, it's in the last 12 cards. So and when the fire truck comes out, that's the end of the game, because historically the fire truck came blasted gasoline into the building, and then they threw in a grenade and lit the whole thing on fire. So pretty horrible. So the morning phase has you start with some riflemen in a couple different spots. I'll show you here if you can see. Let's hope. So the rifleman has a couple stats on him. The one in the circle is a 1. That basically is his attack value. So that's going to determine how many dice he rolls. Whereas the 4 is his defense value. So anytime you're attacking the rifleman, you would need to roll a 4 or higher on your die to hurt him. So I'm going to put that back down. Then each different phase of the game, whether morning, midday, or evening, has some cards that you set aside just depending on the act. So in the morning one, you set aside the 3 grenade cards. I'll show you kind of how those come up. Those are each labeled 1, 2, or 3. And those come up under certain circumstances. So the way you start this out is you're going to draw 5 cards for the enemy phase. You're going to do them one at a time. Now I've kind of seeded this deck a little bit so that I could show you some different things and how they work. So first I got a submachine gunner. So it's going to say roll in place in spaces 1 through 6. So usually what I do is I go ahead and grab the submachine gunner token. Has a little higher attack value than the rifleman, same defense. And then you're going to roll the 6-sided dice with the numbers written on it. And it's going to tell you what section you're going to put it in. So this one says 1, so it's going to go in the 1, 2 section. Now there's already a assault token there. So what he's going to do is he's going to move along the same track that he's on. The submachine gunner is going to go in that first spot. Because the assault token got adjacent to this number 1, this represents a barrier from their entering. What we're going to do is we're going to grab those grenades I put aside. We're going to find the one that is listed as barrier number 1, which is right here on top. And we're going to shuffle that right back into the enemy deck. Now, if that pops up again when we're drawing the cards, what we're going to do is we're going to take one of these white cubes and we're going to put it right there on that 1 to say that that barrier has been destroyed. Now, before you get that destroyed, if soldiers keep coming out on this same track, what you're going to do is you're going to start to stack them up in front of that barrier. So you could, I'm kind of supposing here that I've gone through a couple turns maybe. And until that grenade comes up, they cannot get through. Once they do, they'll move in basically in order of how they are. So they could end up breaching the building, which is not what you want. You can see there's some spots that say ground floor, basement, and there's 2 other ground floors. And that just tells you what entrance they're at. So once they move off of that, they go into the specific entrance to the building that's equivalent to what's here. So you want to stop them from doing that in general, because if there is someone in the space, which I'll show you later, when they get in, they immediately kill whoever's there. So that's bad news. So anyway, that's how they move along the track. So I've done my first card. I'm just going to set that down here. Card number 2, I got the machine gunner. Okay, so this is one of the support cards. So this is place activate C. So you're going to have some tokens that correspond with that. So let me find, okay. So we've got that one here, machine gunner C. I'm going to find that spot on the board. It's right here. And as soon as I put him down, we're going to resolve this card. So he has an attack value of 1 and assault value of 4, and he's going to attack the white or gray spaces, which are kind of over on the far side, which I think I showed you earlier. And so what I'm going to do, because he has 1 dice, I'm going to take a red die, and then I'm going to take that 1 through 6 die. So I'm going to go and roll those, and it's going to tell me that he's aiming for space 6. But he also has to get past the defense of the floor that he's on. So he'd be shooting up here. Because he only rolled a 3, he wouldn't actually hit anybody this time. So I would have lucked out in that case. If he had hit somebody, what you would do, they wouldn't necessarily die right away, but you'd put these disrupted tokens on anyone in that space, and they wouldn't be able to move until they'd clear that off themselves, either through a command action or a recover action. The next card is a leader. So he'll go on the board, much like the soldiers do, but you don't roll for him. It'll say specifically, like this one says, place at the 5 to 6 space. So you're going to look for him specifically. So I got to find the Willer token. That's probably said in a more German-sounding way, but all right. So he goes over here again. He's going to push these guys forward. Go there because he's now adjacent to the 3. I'm going to find the 3 grenade card. which is right here. I'm going to shuffle that back into the enemy deck. Now, the leaders are important, one, because they're a little tougher to kill, and then also, if you get to the end of the deck of cards, that's what symbolizes the end of the part of day you're at. If you get to the end of the deck of cards and you have a leader still on the board and you have assault tokens in the post office, then you have to shuffle up the deck again and keep going through this five card draw sequence until you've managed to either get it so there's no assault tokens in the post office or there's no leaders on the board. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to prolong these phases any more than you have to, because chances are it's only going to cost you pain. So that's important. It's good to know that he's out there and try to get rid of him. Okay, then the final card is Machine Gunner again, and it's actually the same spot as last time. So since there's already a token there, we would place the Machine Gunner emplaced token over that, and now he has a higher armor and he rolls 3 dice to injure people in the post office as well. So if I went ahead and did that, roll these together. Okay, so he's going for the white area, and that has a defense of 5. He did roll a 5. And he's going to attack section 6, which you'll see when I get back to the other side that each space is numbered. So everyone in space 6 in the white section would get a disruption token. So right now I have one person in there. It's not the end of the world. If somebody already has a disruption token on them and then they do something that would receive another one, then they're actually killed. So you don't want that to happen. So once I've done that, I would go over to the defense phase. Okay, so now we're at the defense phase. So this is where all of our heroes here, all our defenders, are going to do various actions. So you're going to start out, you have 4 move tokens. I'll show them to you here. So you have 4 of those that you can use for anybody. You can't move anyone twice. So it was a little tricky for me to get the movement of this, but I think I kind of got it. So any one of these tokens can move to any spot on the same floor for the cost of a move. If they wanted to go to a different floor, they'd have to go to one of the interior spaces here, which are these 3 there, and then they can move to any adjacent one. And from there, later on, they can move further into the post office. They can also carry items with them. They can carry up to 2 items. So for instance, if this person wanted to carry this gun and the ammo token with them, they could, and they can move somewhere else with those. Some of the characters have an L on them. I'm trying to find one of the ones that does right now. Like this guy. And he can actually carry up to 4 items with him. You can also move items to somewhere else on your floor without moving your character if you just wanted to, like, I don't know, toss them over there, I guess. I usually start out by trying to get my guys away from the entrances, at least the ones that the bad guys are likely to come through. Because as I mentioned, should they breach the post office, if they were to show up in this space, for instance, anyone defending that space would be dead. So that's not great. Now you have to keep in mind that there are spots that are squares here, and there are spots that are rectangles. The squares can only hold 2 tokens. The rectangles can hold 3. The interior spaces can technically hold as many as you want to put in there. So I usually move people according to what I want them to do, which is usually a matter of shooting guys out there to try to keep them from coming in. You might, when you get to the night phase, you eventually want to help people escape. So you'll want to get them actually to the entrances so that you can help them get out of the post office. So when you move a character, I'm just going to move one sort of randomly here. You would just take them, put that token on them, go ahead and move them to wherever it is you want them to be, and you're all set as far as that goes. So you'll move 4 people, and then you can start doing different actions. I'm going to tell you these actions a little bit out of order how they show you in the book. So a lot of times when you do actions, you will have to flip over to your exhausted side. So one of them is if you have a character, I probably shouldn't have done it with this particular gentleman here. If you have a character that has a C on him, he has a C and an I, then he can basically recover 3 people on his same floor. So like if he was exhausted and this guy was exhausted and maybe this guy had one of the disruption tokens on them, he could then basically use his action to flip these 2 guys over and maybe remove that disruption token. So that's a really powerful tool. I recommend always keeping an eye on that because you're going to end up using it a lot to make sure everybody can move. That does exhaust the person who did the command, but it can help a lot of other people do various things. You also have certain guys, actually both those gentlemen here on this part of the board that have the C also have an I, and that's the inspiration. As long as that character is not exhausted or disrupted himself, he actually will lend an extra die to any of the attack rolls of anyone on his floor. So that's really, really good, because sometimes you need to get a really good roll. So it pays sometimes to not use those guys other than, or maybe use them last in a turn. So that way they're there to inspire your people. So anyway, you can do the command action. You can do the recover action. So if you had like one person who was exhausted and you didn't necessarily want to use the command action or couldn't for some reason, you could just choose to recover him, turn him over, or get rid of the disrupted token. Now you can suppress. So this one's kind of an interesting one. So your characters can shoot basically at a space that they have line of sight to if they have a ranged weapon and they have an ammo token as well. Now this gentleman here also has a +1 suppress, so when he does it, he's really good. And what you'll do is you're going to target a space that does not have an enemy on it. I'm going to move actually one of these guys from over here and pretend that's empty. And so you don't have to roll for this, but basically he can do his attack value, which is 2, and then if he's suppressing, it's +1, and then this particular weapon is +2 suppress. So he can take 5 of these suppression tokens and place them on that space of the board. And then when any bad guy tries to move into that space, you could choose as many of those tokens as you want and roll that many dice to hit that person. And if you kill him, he goes away and the remaining suppression tokens stay. If you don't kill him, then all the suppression tokens go away and that bad guy goes ahead and moves in the space. But it's a good way to kind of make a trap for your enemies to kind of keep them out of your hair, or make sure that they're going to be, or hopefully make sure they're going to be slowed down. So the other thing you can do is just attack. So it's assumed that everybody has a hand weapon of some kind, which is great when someone is in the same floor as you. So if the bad guys were to get into the post office, then it's good to be able to shoot them wherever you're at. But if you're trying to shoot people on the outside, there's a couple rules. So I mentioned line of sight before. Other than that, if you're on the top floor and you want to shoot at somebody outside, you need to have a ranged weapon token on your space with you, which everyone starts out with that on the top floor. Now, if you're on the ground floor, you don't need that to shoot at people out there, but if I wanted to shoot at the support tokens, like the machine gunners, then they would need a ranged weapon to shoot at them as well. And the folks in the basement can't really shoot at anybody, so unless someone comes down there to them. So that's more or less how that works as far as attack. Now, let's say that at some point during the game, you actually had gotten breached. Someone had gotten into your the post office. We'll say they'd killed him. He would immediately move over to the interior area. And then, so we go to the next phase, which is the clearing phase. Now, assuming that nobody managed to kill him off and that we have active assault tokens in here, he would basically kill off someone within range of him for every point of attack value he has. And there is a certain list in the rulebook for how they would prioritize. So it's not like you could pick the weakest person possible and get rid of them that way. I don't remember the exact order, and it doesn't matter too much now, but oftentimes it's like the more skilled they are, more important they are, that's the highest priority. So he might, for instance, kill off that guy right off the bat. So you want to keep those guys out of there because they can take out some of your more important people. You really don't want them killing the people with this command or the inspiration abilities, because that can really weaken you as time goes on. So once you're done with the clearing phase, you basically go back to the previous attack phase where you're drawing 5 cards at a time, and you're going to keep going back and forth like this until that deck runs out. Once the deck runs out, you're going to clear off all the assault tokens. You're going to flip over any of your characters who are exhausted. You're going to clear off any of the disrupted tokens, and basically you have a clean start for the next act, which will have you set up in a little bit different way. The only real difference to this whole situation is in the nighttime phase, there's an extra phase after the clearing one, which is the escape phase. So at that point, any characters you have on one of the entrance spaces that is not, I believe, the dark blue ground floor exit space, can then escape, as long as over on the outside part there are no assault tokens or support tokens that would have line of sight to anyone escaping along those paths. So that's a little tricky to do, but the bad guys don't keep coming out in that area during that phase. So if you can just keep that clear, you can get a lot of people to escape, and that's where a lot of points can come from. So that's a very good tactic for when you're trying to beat the game. So overall, it's pretty tough. It's pretty frantic. So, but that's the basics of how this goes. I am kind of skimming over some rules because, as I said, there's a lot of real minute specific things, and I think trying to hit them all is just going to sound like a lot of gobbledygook. Honestly, you kind of have to play through and see how things come up, and then it'll make a lot more sense to you. The first time I played this, I made a lot of mistakes, especially as far as the movement goes. I was misunderstanding it. I think I got confused because you have these spaces that are called the interior post office, but in my head it's like, well, everything inside is of course the interior, so I could just move around anywhere, and I kind of made that part too easy, and that was not what they meant. So after one play and a reread of the rulebook, that was pretty easy to get my handle on it again. So that's the basic gist. I'm going to go ahead and go to the final thoughts and tell you what I thought of this game. Okay, so that was my overview of how to play Soldiers in Postmen's Uniform. Again, you probably don't want to treat that as a pure how to play video. If you get the game, definitely read over the rules. It'll give you a lot better idea about some of the real specifics of what you're doing there, because there's a lot of nitty-gritty stuff that you want to make sure you know before you get into this. So my wife has not played this game. That's why she's not sitting here with me. She's not really much for the solo board games for the most part. So it's just going to be me today. I hope that's all right. So let me tell you about the art in this game. Now, you may have noticed when I did the play overview that those tokens have actual black and white photos on them, and those are all, from my understanding, the people that actually were in the post office at that time. There's a few tokens that don't have a person on them because they didn't have a picture, but pretty much everyone they know of that was represented, or that was in the post office at that time, is represented in the game. There were apparently 2 people that died in the fire that were never identified, and so they don't have tokens for them, but everyone else who was there is a token in the game. I think it's really cool that they used the actual photographs of them for this. I don't always like photographs in games. I don't know why, I just prefer art in general, but I think for something like this, I think it was the right and respectful way to go about it. Now, beyond that, the art of the board is actually really pretty. I think it looks nice. I think, part of it is that shimmery, glossy finish it has, but it really does look nice. I mean, it's not loaded with details, but you can see everything very clearly. I like that they use the color system for line of sight. Kind of reminds me, in that one way, of Unmatched. Makes it really easy to know who can see who. They didn't overcomplicate it that way. The tracks are very easy to see. The paths that the assault tokens go on, very easy to see. They did a great job on that. The art on the enemy cards, that it's not gonna necessarily blow you away, but I think it's good for art about World War II. They didn't try to make it cartoony or anything like that. It has sort of a gritty look to it. Not hyper detailed or anything, but I like it for this game. I think it works out really well. So from there, going on to the theme and how well it is carried over into this game, I think they did a great job there as well. This isn't an event that I actually knew about before looking into this game, and I'm actually really curious to learn a lot more. They do have some tips in here on places that you can learn more. They have a whole area in the back that tells you where they got all their information, so I may look into some of those. I'd really like to see if there's a documentary out there that covers this entire incident. I would love to see that. I don't know if there is. If there is and you know about it, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear that. But it's really interesting how they've done it so that in the morning, they really are just kind of assaulting from one side, and then as you get later in the day, they go to the other side, and you're trying to sneak people out the back. They really, I don't know, they really captured it pretty well, I thought. I really felt like there was a need to oh gosh, okay, they're over here now. We got to run all these guns over to this area to make sure we can shoot at them. That was really cool. I think they incorporated it very well. The fact that there's a few just regular civilians in there that you have to get out of there, and the fact that they harm your morale more if they were to get killed, that's pretty cool because, I mean, ideally you're protecting your citizens, right? So I think it's neat that, you know, they're sort of the high priority in terms of protection, even though they're not they're not really useful in the fight per se. And one of them is actually a little girl, and she's actually you know, the biggest hit to your morale if she should lose. I think it's kind of interesting. Some of the leader characters, actually, if they die, it actually raises your morale one, which I think is sort of interesting. And I was trying to justify that in my head, and I'm thinking it's sort of, you know, seeing your leader die heroically maybe makes you fight all the harder. I'm guessing that's the line of thought there. I'm not totally sure, but that's kind of an interesting take. But I do think that they incorporated the theme very well. Now, as far as components, I think, you know, everything is pretty good quality. The cards are pretty thin. You know, unfortunately I do the I guess it's the riffle shuffle, you know, the one. And even after one shuffle, they started looking a little bent. So you might want to sleeve these up. I haven't done so yet, but it's something I'm very much considering because I do want to play more of this game in the future for sure. And I don't want those cards to be a totally bent up mess. Everything else is pretty solid. The tokens are good thick cardboard. The board itself is gorgeous, very thick and glossy. The glossiness and slickness does cause a little bit of a problem. It's very easy to knock those tokens around on accident, so you have to be careful about that. It can certainly be an issue because you want to remember, or you want to know where everything is supposed to be because it can definitely affect the game as it goes on. One thing too, I didn't show on my playthrough, but if you don't like the tokens to represent like movement and whatnot, they actually come with a whole bunch of wooden cubes as well. So if you prefer just like different colored cubes for those actions, you can use those instead. I like the tokens better, even though I like cubes a lot. Like, I like the tokens better just because they have symbols on them. It's a little easier for me to remember what each token is supposed to be. It's a little more clear in my head. But then again, the cubes don't take up as much space covering up everything, so there's that as well. Now, gameplay overall. So this game does what every solo game should do if it's got a points thing and you're trying to beat your previous score. It actually has a breakdown based on how many points you got of how well you did. So I haven't actually lost yet, which is an interesting thing, but I've scored a minor victory and I scored a major victory. I haven't scored the epic victory, which I think once I do that, I'll go on and try the variants. I haven't tried those yet because I want to really feel like I've mastered the main game before I get to those. But there are variants in here to kind of expand the play of this game, so you can try out different, slightly different variants on it. But it's an interesting thing because even my minor victory that I got, technically, now granted, my first game, there were some rules I messed up, for sure, especially with the movement. I know I messed up some stuff. So I'm not counting the score for much. But what was unusual is that I didn't have anyone actually successfully escape. I did have people survive in the post office, technically, and so I got a minor victory. I think that's sort of weird in a way because everyone in the post office then, really, when you pull that fire truck card, is going to die. So technically, everybody died. So I don't really feel like that felt like a minor victory. So that's a little weird. I think maybe they could have called their breakdown of points something different or put in something like that where if like you don't have any escapees, then it still counts as a loss. That's just me. It's not a big deal. But you're not going to get everyone out, I don't think. And so they have to give you something for, you know, getting some of your people out of there. But yeah, really nobody, not a soul escaped. So it was kind of weird that I got a minor victory, even though I messed up some rules to get there. A little strange, but still good. I really felt like this game had a lot of intensity to it. You know, there's a lot of dice rolls. A lot of people don't like tons of dice rolls, but I do, weirdly, especially in something like this, because I feel like, you know, a game can only represent so many different things. And there's always going to be things that it just can't really abstract into the game or put into the game without it being this ridiculous set of rules that no one ever wants to play because it take like 15 hours to do a turn. So randomization kind of, in my opinion, allows it to cover some of those things that maybe you can't put in the game. Like, oh, maybe this guy firing the gun's actually a little distracted by something and that's why he missed. You know, who knows? You could come up with reasons for all of it if you want to. So I didn't mind that at all. There's a lot of die rolls. There's ways to kind of make sure you're rolling more dice. You can't really change. I don't think there's a way to re-roll your dice rolls or anything like that. So a little bit of mitigation, not a ton, but I enjoyed it. I think it's good as far as that goes. I think it's got a bit of a tower defense feel as the Nazis are are coming along their path to breach the post office and you're trying to stop them. Definitely a little bit of tower defense feel to that. And then just figuring out who you're going to move and who you're going to help recover and whatnot. It gets kind of hard because you only have the few actions per turn. So you probably can't do everything you want to, especially later in the game when things intensify. I do find that the game feels pretty easy to stay safe until the nighttime phase. That's when I really started seeing a lot of breaches into the post office with multiple people and whatnot. Earlier on, I find it pretty easy to stop them, although obviously that's going to depend on if you can shoot them down or not. It could be that I've been having really lucky die rolls. Certainly that is a factor of some sort, but regardless, not too challenging to keep them out of the post office, but it's good because it lets you kind of situate things for that later round, and you really need to kind of be working towards that while still trying to deal with your situation at hand. So that's pretty cool. So let me get to the final score. So my final score for this is an 8. And I gotta admit, I was worried going into this that I wouldn't like it. Like I said, I don't play a lot of war games, and the rulebook was, I think it's 36 pages, something like that, which isn't the biggest rulebook I've ever seen, but it was a little intimidating, especially dealing with all the factors that you have in here. There was some stuff that I found a little easy to get mixed up on in the first playthrough, but I figured it out in subsequent plays. But I just really like it. I really like trying to figure out like where I need to get people and who's important to get where and why, and then trying to stop those bad guys. And it's crazy how when I play, like I start kind of attributing certain things to people, like, oh man, like this guy, he keeps missing, like he really needs a win, and so I try to like give him all the chance I can to take out somebody important, which maybe is a bad thing. Or oh, this guy's a sharpshooter, he always gets the guy he needs to get, and so I want him to activate whenever I can, even though it doesn't actually matter. This is what happens in my goofy head. But I like that. I like trying to worry about the civilians in the building and trying to get them out of there. Beyond just them being worth the most points to have escape and the biggest detriment to your points should they be killed, I don't know, like I really get into the mindset of like, okay, we have to protect these people for sure. They have to escape, cover them however you can, and I love it. I mean, you're trying to decide sometimes who's going to possibly get sacrificed in this, and there's an extra like heartbreak feeling when you pull out the howitzer card, which I didn't go into in the overview, but it wrecks lives. It's so brutal. It is so brutal. In my most recent game, it ended up wiping out like everyone in the top 2 floors. Brutal. But it's part of the excitement of the game, and like you can imagine being these people in space and being like, okay, we're getting this under control. Like, oh my God, they brought a howitzer, or oh gosh, they've got armored vehicles now. How are we going to hit them? It's crazy, and I feel weird, kind of make it seem like we're making a game out of this horrible event, but it really helps put me as much as I can without being there. Obviously, it's much more horrible to be in that situation, but to help me kind of feel some empathy for that situation and can imagine, what I'm doing, except for with a lot more panic and a lot more on the line. I really, really like it a lot. I think it's great. I do kind of worry that if the variants aren't a big enough change, it could eventually start feeling sort of samey. Like you sort of know it's going to come out, not necessarily exact order, but it's in those decks pretty quickly. And you're basically doing the same kind of things. I think you could eventually get to the point where you're sort of locking down, like, okay, well, we need to at this part of the morning phase, you want to make sure you're getting these people up here so they're ready for the midday phase. And in the midday phase, you want to get these people over here so they're ready for the evening phase, and, getting these people ready so they can escape when the time comes. I could see maybe getting to the point where you start falling into very specific strategies to get the job done. And I guess if you do that, it could start to get boring at some point, even though it is going to be dependent on your rolls, and sometimes what you planned is not going to go the way you planned, for sure. But I think I've got a lot of plays left in this before that happens. It is exciting. Every time I roll the dice and something scary is going to happen to me. It really is. Or I'm hoping like this soldier doesn't come on the board in this one area because that'll make them breach the post office, and I'm praying for a different roll. I love it. I think it's great. You know, if it wasn't for the fact that I do worry eventually it might get sort of samey, it'd be a higher score for sure. But as far as, you know, games that are pure solos go, it's amazing. I'm glad I have a game that's set in World War II that I feel a little more comfortable playing. No one has to play the really bad guys. And you get to kill the really bad guys, which is always a plus. So anyway, those are my thoughts on Soldiers and Postmen's Uniform. I'd really like to hear other people's opinions of this. So if it's something that you end up playing, either because you played it beforehand or if you play it after my review, I would love to hear what you thought of it and if you enjoyed it as much as I did. So please let me know in the comments if that's the case. Otherwise, if you could hit like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and click the little bell icon so that way you'll know the next time I put out a video, I'd appreciate it. Other than that, I look forward to seeing you all around the table again at All Games New and Old. Bye. Oh, God. Please say I turned on the mic. Please say I turned on the mic. I did. I turned on the mic. I mean, it's good for being art about World War II. I mean, they didn't make it... There's a fly in here. There's a fly in here and it's driving me insane.